back to my channel. So I hope everyone is doing good and staying safe. And in today's video, we're going to talk about the case of John Bingham, the 7th Earl of Lucan. So Richard John Bingham was born on December 18 of 1934 in London. His parents were George Bingham, the 6th Earl of Lucan, and Caitlin Dawson. When he was a newborn, he was taken care of by the nursery maid because he was found a blood cut in his mother's lungs, forced her to remain in a nursery home. So his name is actually Richard John, but he goes by John, so that's how I'm going to refer to him. When John was 3, he attended preschool in Tite Street with his elder sister Jane, but in 1939, with the war approaching, the two were taken to a relative safety of Wales. In the following year, their younger siblings, Sally and Huck, I hope I'm pronouncing that right, they joined them and they all traveled to Toronto in Canada, and shortly after that, they all moved to New York in the United States. They stayed there for 5 years with the multimillionairess Marcia Tucker. So while he was there, John attended the Harvey School and he usually spent the summer holidays away from his siblings on a summer camp. On February of 1945, John and his siblings returned to England, and the war was still going on, so when they arrived, their former house at Chain Walk had been bombed, and the house at 22 Eaton Square had its windows blown out. John then started to have nightmares and he was taken to a psychiatrist. His parents were both agnostics and socialists. Despite the family's noble ancestry, they preferred a more austere existence than that offered by Marcia Tucker, who was an extremely wealthy Christian. As an adult, John remained an agnostic like his parents, but when he had his children, he ensured that they would go to Sunday school. He preferred to give them a more traditional childhood. Then John attended Eton College, and that's where he started to develop a taste for gambling. He supplemented his pocket money with income from bookmarking, placing his earnings into a secret bank account, and rarely left school's grounds to go attend horse races. According to his mother, John's academics were far from credible, but he became captain of Rose House before leaving in 1953 to undertake his national service. He became second lieutenant in his father's regiment, the Coldstream Guards, and he was stationed in the Krefeld, West Germany. And while there, he also became a keen poker player. On leaving the army in 1954, John joined Williams Brand Sons & Co., a London-based merchant bank, on an annual salary of 1,500 libras. In 1960, he met Stephen Raphael, a rich stockbroker who was a skilled backgammon player. They holidayed together in the Bahamas. They went water skiing, they played golf, backgammon, and poker. John became a regular gambler and an early member of John Aspinall's Claremont Gaming Club located in Berkeley Square. He often won at games of skill like backgammon and bridge, but he also accumulated huge losses. On one occasion, John lost 8,000 libras, and that was about 2/3 of the money he received annually from various family trusts. And on another night at a casino, he lost around 10,000 libras. That's a lot of money. But at that time, his uncle, John Piven, helped him to pay the debt, and then 2 years later, he paid him back. But about 1960, John decided to leave Brand after he won 26,000 libras. A colleague of his had been promoted before him, and let's just say that he didn't like that very much, so he protested, and then he just gave up his job by saying, "Why will I work in a bank when I can earn a year's money in one single night at the tables?" So then he decided to travel back to the US, where he played golf, raced powerboat, and drove his Aston Martin around the West Coast. While he was there, he also visited his older sister Jane and his former guardian, that was Marcia Tucker. Then he returned back to England and he left his parents' house and moved into a flat in Park Crescent. So John met his future wife, Veronica Duncan, early in 1963. Veronica was born in 1937 and her father had died in a car accident when she was young when they moved to South Africa. Then her mother remarried and they returned back to England, where her new stepfather became manager of a hotel in Guildford. She also had a sister named Christina, and Veronica was a very talented woman. She loved art, so she went to study at an art college in Bournemouth. So Veronica and her sister Christina later shared a flat in London when Veronica was working as a model and then later worked as a secretary. Later on, Veronica's sisters got married to a wealthy man named William Kidd, and this man was half-brother to Peter Kidd, who was stepfather of Diana Spencer, who was a later Princess of Wales, and her sister's marriage was what introduced her to the high society of London, and it was at a golf club function in the country that Veronica and John first met. And believe it or not, they got married in that same year, on November 20th of 1963. But 2 months after they got married, on January 21st of 1964, the 6th Earl of Lucan, John's father, had died of a stroke. So John inherited 250,000 of livres, and he also inherited his father's title. So he became the 7th Earl of Lucan, Baron Lucan of Castlebar, Baron Lucan of Malcolm, Lucan and Baronet Bingham of Castlebar. That's too many titles. So his wife, Veronica, became the Countess of Lucan. On October 24th of 1964, their first child was born. It was a girl named Frances, and early next year they decided to employ a nanny to look after her, and that person was Lillian Jenkins. John tried to teach Veronica about gambling and traditional pursuits like fishing and hunting and shooting, and he even bought her golf lessons, but she later gave up on that sport. It just wasn't for her. John's daily routine consists in having breakfast at 9 a.m., coffee, dealing with the morning letters, reading the newspapers, and playing the piano. He sometimes jogged in the park and even took his dog for walks. And after lunch, he would usually spend his whole afternoon playing backgammon games. And then at night time, he would go home and change into his evening dress, and he went back to Claremont Club, where he usually spent the next few hours gambling. Sometimes Veronica was there too. In 1956, while he was still working at Brent's, he had written of his desire to have 2 million livres in the bank, claiming that motor cars, yachts, and expensive holidays, security for the future, would give himself and a lot of other people a lot of pleasure. Sorry, my camera just died, but let's just continue. So John was a professional gambler and he was a very skilled player. He was even once rated amongst the world's top 10 backgammon competitors. He won the St. James Club tournament and he was champion of the West Coast of America. He gained the nickname of Lucky Lucan. His losses easily outweighed his winnings, and in reality he was anything but lucky. So as I said before, John was really interested in horses, and in 1966 he was spending more money in race entry fees than he would receive at his winnings. And despite some arguments over money between him and Veronica, she was still completely ignorant about his losses. Then they have more 2 children. George was born in 1967 and Camilla was born in 1970. And after the birth of Camilla, Veronica suffered postpartum depression. So John became involved in a mental well-being, and in 1971, he took her to a psychiatric clinic where she refused to be admitted. Instead, she agreed to home visits from a psychiatrist. In July of 1972, they went on a holiday to Monte Carlo. Veronica quickly returned to England and left her 2 older children with John. The pressure of maintaining their finances, the costs of John's gambling addiction, and Veronica's wicked and mental condition, all of these took their toll at marriage. 2 weeks after the Christmas in 1972, John moved into a small property in Eaton Row. Some months later, he moved again, this time to a larger flat nearby Elizabeth Street. And Veronica tried a reconciliation, but at that point, John didn't care about their marriage. He just wanted the custody of their children. So he wanted to show that Veronica wasn't able to take care of the kids, and for that he started to spy on her, and later he hired some private investigators to do the same. John even canvassed doctors that explained to him that Veronica didn't gone mad. She just suffered from anxiety and depression. Then John told his friends that no one will work for Veronica. She fired children's long-term nanny Lillian Jenkins in December of 1972. And those children had a lot of nannies. And one of them, 26-year-old Stefania. So Stefania was told by Veronica that John had hit her one day with a can, and on one occasion he pushed her down the stairs. Veronica also told Stefania for her to not be surprised if he kills me one day. But then she was fired in March of 1973. But while she was with two of the children, she was confronted by John and two private detectives. They told her that the children had been made wards of court and that she must release them into his custody, which she did. Francis was collected from school later in that day. Veronica applied to court to have the children returned, and the judge set a date for a hearing for June of 1997. So to defend herself against John's claim, she booked herself a 4-day stay at a clinic in Roehampton, and the doctors acknowledged that she still needed some psychiatrist support. She wasn't mentally ill. And John's case depended upon Veronica being unable to take care of the children. But at the hearing, he was forced to defend his own behavior towards Veronica. But after several weeks, on the advice of his lawyers, he conceded the case. So the judge was not impressed by his character. So Mr. Justice Reese gave the custody of the children to Veronica. John was still allowed to see his kids. He could see them every other weekend. But this began a bitter dispute between Veronica and John, and even between their friends and Veronica's own sister. So John began to watch Veronica's moves again. He would record some of their phone conversations and show that to some of his friends, and he told his friends and even his bank manager that Veronica was spending money like water. He had to pay her 40 liras a week. He continued to do that, but he may have canceled their regular food order in Harrigan's, and he delayed the payment to the milkman. And he knew that Veronica was required by the court to employ a live-in nanny. So with no income of her own, she then took a part-time job at a local hospital. So she hired a temporary nanny, Elizabeth Murphy. She then became friends with John, and John used to buy her drinks for her to tell him information about Veronica. Then he told his private detective to investigate Elizabeth and to find evidence that she was not capable to take care of the children. And they found something. I couldn't figure out what exactly they found out, but they found something against her. But later on, she was hospitalized with cancer. Another temporary nanny, Christabel Martin, she reported strange phone calls to the house. Some with heavy breathing, some of them were from a man asking for people that didn't exist. And following a series of temporary nannies, Sandra Rivett was employed in 1974. So Sandra Eleanor Rivett was born on September 16 of 1945. Her family moved to Australia when she was 2 years old, but then they returned to England in 1955. Sandra was a popular child, and at school she was described as intelligent, although she doesn't excel academically. She worked for 6 months as an hairdresser before she took a job as a secretary in Croydon. After a failed romance, Sandra was a voluntary patient at a mental hospital in Redhill, Surrey, where she was treated for depression. After that, she met her future husband. She became engaged to a builder named John. Then she took a job as a children's nanny for a doctor in Croydon. On March of 1964, she gave birth to a boy named Stephen, but her relationship with John was failing. It was not going well. So she decided to return to her parents' house, and she was thinking about giving up the baby for adoption. Her parents then decided to adopt Stephen in May of 1965. Sandra later worked at a home for the elderly before she decided to move to Portsmouth with her older sister. And then she met Roger Rivers, and they got married on June of 1967. Roger was serving as a Royal Navy able seaman, and later he worked as a loader for British Road Services, while Sandra was working a part-time at an orphanage in Purley. Their marriage started to collapse in May of 1964 because Roger was suspicious of Sandra's movements while he was away, so he decided to live with his parents, and a few weeks later Sandra started to work for the Lucans. And she met another man and she started dating him. His name is John Hankins. So Sandra usually went out with her boyfriend John on Thursdays, but on that week she had changed her night off, so she had seen him the previous days, and on Thursdays she was working. And the last time they spoke was around 8 p.m. on November 7th. So it was a normal night at work. She was a nanny for Lucan's children. So she put the younger children to bed at about 8:55, and then she asked Veronica if she would like a cup of tea before heading downstairs to the basement to make one. And as she entered the basement, she was beat up to death with a piece of bandage lead pipe. Her killer then placed her body into a canvas mailbag. While this was happening, Veronica was wondering what had happened to Sandra for her to not show up. She was taking too long for make a simple cup of tea, so she went downstairs to see what happened. So she went downstairs to the basement. So when she arrived to the top of the stairs that led to the basement, she called for Sandra, and obviously Sandra didn't respond, and Veronica was attacked as well. And as she was screaming for her life because she was terrified, she really thought that she was going to get murdered, her attacker said, "Shut up." And she recognized that voice. And she claimed that that voice belonged to her husband, John Bingham. Apparently the two continued to fight, but then she was able to bite his fingers, and when he threw her face down to the carpet, she managed to turn around and she squeezed his ball, and then he let her go. When she asked him where was Sandra, at first he didn't say anything, but then he admitted that he had killed her. So at this point, Veronica is terrified, but she says to John that she can help him escape if only he stays at the house for a few days to allow her injuries to heal. So his older daughter, France, she was still awake, so John put her to bed, and then he walked into one of the bedrooms. So when Veronica entered that same room to lie on the bed, he told her that it was better if she put some towels because otherwise the bed will be stained with blood. So he went to the bathroom to get those towels, and Veronica is still terrified at this point, so she decided to run away. He was in the bathroom. He wasn't able to hear her leaving, so she decided to just run away from that house. I don't know if I would left my children with my husband who just killed their nanny. I don't know if that was very smart, but I'm not here to judge. So obviously John didn't stay at his house after he saw that Veronica was nowhere to be found. So he also left. So he went to Madeline's Foreman's house, who was a mother to one of Frances' school friends. And she said that he arrived there sometime between 10 p.m. and 10:30 p.m. But Madeline was home alone, so she ignored the door. But shortly afterwards, she received a telephone call and she put the receiver down. The person who called her was John, but police know that he was him to call her because there were found blood stains on her front door, so he was there. Then John called his mother sometime between 11 p.m. and 11:30 p.m. and he told her to go get his children. He spoke about a catastrophe that had happened at Veronica's house, but he didn't specify what had happened. He told her that he had drive past Veronica's house and he saw her fighting with a man in the basement. And he said that he entered the house and found Veronica screaming. The police forced their way into Veronica's house and they found Sandra's body, and later Veronica was taken to St. George Hospital. John drove his Ford Corsair to Oakfield to visit his friends, the Maxwell Scotts. And the last person who saw John was Susan Maxwell Scott. But now let's go back to the murder scene. So the Detective Chief Superintendent Roy Ransom arrived at Veronica's house early in November 8th. Sandra was already pronounced dead, and forensic officers and photographers had already been called to the property. Other than the front door that the first officers to arrive there had to kick in, there was no signs of forced entry. The area around the top of the basement staircase was heavily stained with blood. There was a blood-stained lead pipe leaning on the floor. At the foot of the stairs, 2 cups and saucers were in a pool of blood, and Sandra's body was also in a pool of blood. So that basement and that staircase, they were literally covered up in Sandra's blood. And not only Sandra's, but Veronica's too, because she was also attacked by John and she bled too. So the police also searched the house that John had moved into in 1973, but they didn't find anything. They found his personal belongings like money, his wallet, his passport, his keys to the Mercedes that he had that was parked outside, but that's all they found. So no one really thought that he had run away because his personal belongings were all in that house. Then Detective Ranson visited Veronica at St. George's Hospital. Although she was heavily sedated, she was still able to describe what had happened to her. After she told everything she knew to the detective, there was a police officer who was left there to guard her and to protect her because her attacker is still on the loose. He could come back to finish what he started, so they had to protect her. Then after they took Sandra's body to the mortuary, the search was undertaken of all local basement areas and gardens. After removing Sandra's body from the canvas sack and beginning the post-mortem examination, pathologist Keith Simpson told Ranson that he was certain that Sandra had been killed before her body was placed in the sack, and that in his opinion the lead pipe found at the scene could be the murder weapon. Her husband Roger had an alibi for that night, so he was clear. And one thing that I don't understand, after they didn't actually divorce, they were just living separate lives. When she was murdered, she already had another boyfriend, but she was still married to Roger. And Veronica and John, they weren't together anymore, but they were still married. I don't understand this. Ever heard about divorce? No? Okay, let's move on. And police also questioned her other male friends and boyfriends, but they were all had an alibi, so they were not considered suspects. Her parents confirmed that Sandra had a good relationship with Veronica and that she had a strong bond with Veronica's children. Meanwhile, John was anywhere to be found, so his description was circulated to police forces across the country. Newspapers and television stations were only told that John was wanted by the police for questioning. But hours earlier, John had called his mother again around 12:30 a.m. He told her that he would be in touch with her later on that day, but declining talking with the police. In that moment, he said that he would call them later in the morning, but the truth is that he never did. Detective Ranson then discovered that John had traveled to Oakville when he received a call from Ian Maxwell Scott, who told him that John had arrived to his house a few hours after the murder, and he spoke to his wife Susan. While he was there, John wrote 2 letters to his brother-in-law, Bill Kidd, and he posted them to his London address. Ian also called Bill to tell him about the letters, and then he drove to London to collect the letters and to read them. After reading those letters, he noticed that they were blood-stained, so he took them to Detective Ranson. And now you remember I said earlier that Susan refused to tell them what they had spoken, and police questioned her about this. They asked her why she didn't inform them immediately about John's appearance at her house. And she told them that she hadn't seen newspapers or any television news, and that she didn't know that his visit was so important, so that's why she didn't told anything. The Ford Corsair that John had been seen driving, and whose details had the previous day been circulated across the country, was found on November 11, about 16 miles away from Oakville. And in the car, they found a piece of lead pipe covered in surgical tape and a full bottle of vodka. Then the car was removed to forensic examination. And 2 witnesses claimed that the car was parked there sometime between 5 a.m. and 8 a.m. on the morning of November 8. And the owner of the car was not John. The car belonged to someone named Michael Studd, and this man also received a letter from John, but he didn't even open it. He threw the envelope away, so it was impossible to check its postmarks to see where he had been sent from. At first, Detective Ransom suspected a suicide, but after several searches, they realized that it was impossible because his body was nowhere to be found, so he most likely didn't commit suicide. The only thing they found was the remains of a judge who had been disappeared for years, but no signs of John. A warrant for John's arrest to answer charges for murdering Sandra and to attempt murdering Veronica was issued on November 12 of 1974, and his description that had already been issued to police forces across the UK were then issued to Interpol. The forensic examination of the lead pipe that was found at the murder scene and in the corset's boot revealed traces of blood, and this was proved to be a mix between Veronica's and Sandra's blood. There was also found hair that belonged to Veronica on that pipe, but none belonged to Sandra, and the pipe found in the car had no blood and no hair. Home Officer scientists were unable to prove that those two pipes found both in the car and at the murder scene were cut from the same piece of piping, although they thought they were. And as I mentioned before, John wrote letters to Bill, and they were both stained with blood, and that blood, they say that is also a mix between Veronica's and Sandra's blood. The letter to Michael didn't have any blood on it, but it was later proven the paper he was reading on had been torn from a writing pad found in the corset's boot. The inquest into Sandra's death opened in November 13 of 1974 and was led by Gavin Thurston. Two witnesses were called to the courtroom: Roger Rivett, who confirmed that he had identified his wife's body, and pathologist Keith Simpson, who confirmed that Sandra had died from being hit on the head with a blunt instrument. At Random's request, the hearing was then adjourned. Further adjournments were made on December of 1974 and on March of 1975. But finally, a full inquest was scheduled for June 16 of 1975. The hearing began with introductions from various legal representatives, including a lawyer hired by John's mother. There were selected 33 witnesses to be called over the following few days, including Veronica Lucan. Gavin Thurston questioned her about her relationship with John, her marriage, her financial affairs, her employment of Sandra, and what had happened on the night of the attack. A detective called Sally Blower, who had taken a statement from Frances Lucan on November of 1974, read the young girl's words to the court. So Frances heard a scream, and a few minutes later, she saw her mother with blood on her face and her father enter the room. She later heard her father calling for her mother, asking where she was, and watched as he left the bathroom and walked downstairs. And she also said that Sandra usually didn't work on Thursday nights. And when Veronica ran away from her house, she went to a bar, and the owner of the bar said that she entered his bar covered with blood from head to toe and that she was in a state of shock. He claimed that she screamed that help me, as she escaped from being murdered. And she also screamed, my children, he just murdered my nanny. Pathologist Keith Simpson outlined his post-mortem examination, concluding that the death was caused by blunt head injuries and inhalation of blood. He also confirmed that the lead pipe found at the murder scene was most likely responsible for Sandra's injuries. The last person to confirm seeing John alive was Susan Maxwell Scott, and she claimed that when he arrived to her house, he looked disheveled and his hair was a little ruffled. His trousers had a damp patch on the right hip. John had told her that he was walking or passing by the house when he saw that Veronica was being attacked by a man. He let himself in, but he slipped in a pool of blood at the bottom of the stairs. He then told Susan that the attacker ran off, and Veronica was very hysterical and accused him of having hired someone to kill her. Once the hearing had ended, Gavin Thurston made a summary of the evidence presented and told the jury their options. At 11:45 a.m., their foreman announced murder by Lord Lucan. John became the first member of the House of Lords to be named a murderer since 1760. Sandra's body was then released to her family, and she was cremated on December 18 of 1974. And John was still nowhere to be found. No one knows where he is or what happened to him. He just vanished. And a few years after this all happened, there were some people who said that they had seen him in New Zealand, in Australia, and South Africa, but the truth is that he was never found. I think he did it, because why would he just vanish if he didn't do it? You guys tell me in the comments your thoughts on this case, and if you enjoyed this video, please give it a like so I know that you enjoyed it. If you want me to talk about a certain case, you can reach out to me through the comments down below or through my social media that will be linked in the description box. And also, if you're new to my channel and you like true crime videos, please subscribe, I really appreciate it. And if you have like a friend or a family member who also enjoys true crime videos, you can share my channel with them. That will mean the world to me. Before I leave, I just want to say that I don't think I'll be able to post a video next week because I have exams. I'm so sorry, but school comes first. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you on my next video. Bye bye!